A 48-year-old woman steps off a train in a frontier town, expecting marriage. Instead, she gets public humiliation when the man who sent for her takes one look and rejects her in front of everyone. She's stranded, broke, and the whole town is watching her fail. Then a widowed carpenter with 2 broken kids offers her shelter. Not out of pity, but something else entirely. What happens next will shake this frozen town to its core. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train's brakes screamed like something dying. Evelyn Mercer pressed her gloved hand against the cold window, watching the frontier town materialize through sheets of falling snow. Pine Ridge. Population maybe 300 on a good day. The kind of place where everyone knew your business before you'd even unpacked your suitcase. She was 48 years old, too old for new beginnings, most people would say. Too worn down by life to expect anything resembling happiness. But she'd answered that advertisement anyway, written in careful script by a man named Gerald Thornton, who claimed he needed a mature woman of good character to help run his general store and share his life. Mature. That was the word that had caught her attention. Not young, not beautiful, just mature. For once, someone wasn't asking her to be something she wasn't. The letter had arrived 4 months ago at the boarding house in Philadelphia, where she'd been working herself half to death scrubbing floors and washing linens for women who looked through her like she was furniture. Gerald's handwriting was neat, his words respectful. He'd lost his first wife to cholera. He was 52, established, lonely. He wasn't looking for romance, he'd written, just partnership, companionship, someone to build a quiet life with. It had seemed almost too good to be true. Evelyn stood slowly as the train lurched to a stop, her back protesting after 3 days of wooden seats and fitful sleep. Her traveling dress was clean but plainly made, dark blue wool that had seen better years. Her carpet bag contained everything she owned: 2 other dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a photograph of parents long dead, and the carefully folded letters from Gerald Thornton tied with string. She descended the steps carefully, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The platform was crowded. Word must have spread that the mail-order bride was arriving today. Evelyn could feel their eyes on her immediately, assessing, judging, finding her lacking before she'd even touched the ground. A woman in an expensive fur-trimmed coat whispered something to her companion. A man in a blacksmith's apron openly stared. 3 young women clustered near the station house, their fresh faces and bright eyes making Evelyn feel every single one of her 48 years. She straightened her spine anyway. Let them look. Mrs. Mercer? The voice came from a thin man in a dark suit, maybe 35, with narrow eyes and a pinched mouth. Not Gerald Thornton. This man was too young, too sharp-looking. He held a clipboard like a weapon. I'm Evelyn Mercer, she said. Charles Whitmore. I'm Mr. Thornton's business associate. He looked her up and down with barely concealed distaste. He's waiting at the store. This way. He turned without helping her with her bag. Evelyn picked it up herself and followed him down the platform, aware of the crowd trailing behind them like spectators heading to a hanging. The snow crunched under her boots. The cold bit through her coat. This wasn't how she'd imagined her arrival, but then again, life rarely matched her imaginings. Pine Ridge's main street was wider than she'd expected, lined with wooden buildings that looked sturdy enough to survive the brutal winters. Thornton's general store stood near the center, its windows bright with lamplight against the gray afternoon. Charles Whitmore opened the door without ceremony. Gerald Thornton stood behind the counter. Evelyn's first thought was that he looked older than 52. His hair was completely white, his face heavily lined, but his eyes were kind when they met hers, and he smiled, tentative, nervous, but genuine. Miss Mercer, he said, you made it safely. I did. She set her bag down, suddenly aware of how she must look after 3 days of travel. Thank you for the ticket, Mr. Thornton, and for the letters. They meant, she's older than you said. The voice came from behind the counter. A woman emerged from the back room, maybe 40, handsome in a severe way, wearing an apron over a crisp gray dress. She looked at Evelyn the way someone might examine a horse they were considering not buying. Margaret, this isn't the time, Gerald said quietly. When is the time, Gerald? Before or after you marry someone completely unsuitable? The word hit Evelyn like a slap. Gerald's face flushed. Margaret is my late wife's sister. She's been helping me run the store since Sarah passed. Helping? Margaret's smile was thin. I've been keeping this business afloat while you've been writing letters to strangers. The small crowd that had followed from the station pressed closer to the windows. Evelyn could see their faces, hungry for drama. This was entertainment. She was entertainment. Perhaps we should speak privately, Evelyn suggested, trying to keep her voice steady. No need for privacy, Margaret said. She turned to Gerald, her voice rising. Look at her, Gerald. Really look. She's nearly 50 years old. She looks exhausted. What exactly did you promise her in those letters? What did you tell her she'd be getting? A partnership, Gerald said, but his voice wavered. I told her the truth. Did you tell her I'd be here? Did you mention that your late wife's family has been running this store for the past 2 years? Margaret crossed her arms. Did you tell her you can barely afford to keep yourself fed, much less a wife? Evelyn felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Gerald wouldn't meet her eyes now. Margaret, please. Please what? Please let you make another mistake? Please stand by while you bring in some desperate woman who probably just wants a roof over her head and doesn't care about anything else? That's enough, Gerald said, but there was no strength in it. Margaret turned to Evelyn. How much did he promise you? What did those letters say? Evelyn's hands were shaking. She gripped her bag tighter to hide it. Mr. Thornton wrote about building a life together, about companionship, about lies, apparently. Margaret looked at Gerald with something close to triumph. Tell her what you told me last night when I asked if you were really going through with this. The store had gone completely silent. Gerald Thornton looked at Evelyn finally, and she saw it in his eyes before he even spoke. The doubt, the fear, the regret. I thought I wanted this, he said quietly. I thought I was ready. But Margaret's right. I can't afford a wife. The store barely makes enough for one person, and with Margaret's family having invested so much, he trailed off. I'm sorry, Miss Mercer. I made a mistake. The words took a moment to land. When they did, Evelyn felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. Not quite surprise. She'd learned long ago that disappointment was life's most consistent gift, but something deeper. Something that felt like the final confirmation of what she'd always suspected about herself. Nobody really wanted her. Not enough to fight for her. Not when it came down to it. I see, she said. I'll pay for your return ticket, Gerald offered weakly. First thing tomorrow morning. The hotel can... Don't bother. The voice came from the doorway. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He wore a carpenter's canvas work clothes, sawdust still on his sleeves. He wasn't handsome in any conventional way. His face was too rough, too weathered, but there was something solid about him, something immovable. Nathan, Gerald said nervously, this doesn't concern you. You just humiliated this woman in front of half the town, Nathan said flatly. That concerns me. Margaret stepped forward. Mr. Hale, I appreciate your concern, but this is a private matter. Nothing's private when you're performing it in front of an audience. Nathan gestured to the crowd pressed against the windows. You want to break an agreement, Gerald? That's your business. But you don't get to treat people like garbage while you do it. I didn't mean to, Gerald started. What you meant doesn't matter much right now. Nathan looked at Evelyn. You got somewhere to stay tonight? She almost laughed. No. Then you'll stay at my place. The store erupted. Margaret's voice cut through the noise. Absolutely not. That's completely inappropriate, Nathan. You can't just... I got 2 kids who need looking after and a cabin that's falling apart, Nathan interrupted. She needs a place to stay. Sounds like a fair trade to me. People will talk, Charles Whitmore said from somewhere in the crowd. People are already talking. Nathan picked up Evelyn's bag without asking. They've been talking since she stepped off that train. Might as well give them something interesting to talk about. Evelyn found her voice. I don't need charity. Not offering charity, offering work. Nathan met her eyes. You know how to cook? Clean? Handle a household? I've been doing it for 30 years. Then you're hired. Temporary arrangement until you figure out what you want to do next. He headed for the door, then paused. Unless you'd rather stay here and listen to these people explain why you're not good enough. The choice wasn't really a choice. Evelyn followed him out into the snow. Behind them, the store exploded with conversation. She could hear Margaret's outraged voice, Gerald's weak protests, the crowd's excited chatter. Let them talk. Let them judge. She'd survived worse than small-town gossip. Nathan's stride was long. She had to hurry to keep up as he headed down the main street, past the saloon and the church and the boarding house, toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to pine forest. I should warn you, Nathan said without slowing down. My kids aren't easy. I didn't expect them to be. And the cabin's a mess. My wife died 3 years ago, and I haven't been able to keep up with much beyond basic carpentry work and making sure the children don't starve. How old are they? Wyatt's 10. Elsie just turned 5. Evelyn did the math. His wife had died when Elsie was barely 2. That's hard. It's life. Nathan stopped suddenly, turning to face her. Look, I'm not trying to be unkind, but I need you to understand something. This isn't about rescuing you. I need help. Real help. The last 3 women who tried to work for me lasted less than a week each, because Wyatt's angry at the world, and Elsie won't stop crying, and the house is falling apart, and I'm barely holding it all together. If you can't handle that, tell me now, and I'll take you to the boarding house instead. I can handle it. You sure? Evelyn looked at this stranger who'd just upended her humiliation with a job offer that was probably going to be harder than anything she'd done in Philadelphia. I'm 48 years old, Mr. Hale. I've worked in factories and boarding houses and places that would make your cabin look like a palace. I've scrubbed floors until my hands bled and hauled laundry until my back gave out. I've survived being unwanted and unwelcome in more places than I can count. So yes, I can handle 2 grieving children and a messy house. What I can't handle is one more person treating me like I'm disposable. Something shifted in Nathan's expression. Not quite respect, but something close to it. Fair enough, he said. Wages are $2 a week plus room and board. You can leave whenever you want. I won't stop you. Agreed. They shook hands. His grip was calloused and strong. The cabin appeared through the trees after another 10 minutes of walking. It was larger than Evelyn had expected, built from solid timber with a stone chimney and a wide porch. But Nathan was right. It was falling apart. The porch railing sagged. One shutter hung crooked. The yard was littered with wood scraps and tools left where they'd been dropped. Needs work, Nathan said unnecessarily. Most things do. He pushed open the door. The interior was dim and cold. A fire burned weakly in the fireplace, barely giving off heat. Dirty dishes were piled in the wash basin. Clothes lay scattered across furniture. The floor needed sweeping. The windows needed washing. The whole place smelled like burnt food and unwashed laundry, and the particular kind of sadness that came from people just barely surviving. 2 children sat at a rough wooden table. The boy, Wyatt, had Nathan's dark hair and sharp eyes. He looked up when they entered, his expression immediately hostile. The little girl, Elsie, had lighter hair, tangled and uncombed, falling around a thin face with enormous gray eyes. She clutched a rag doll that was missing one arm. This is Mrs. Mercer, Nathan said. She's going to be helping around the house for a while. We don't need help, Wyatt said immediately. Yeah, we do. Nathan set Evelyn's bag down. Your room's through there, he told Evelyn, pointing to a door off the main room. It's small, but it's private. There's a bed and a dresser. That was Mama's sewing room, Wyatt said. His voice was sharp, accusatory. Mama's been gone 3 years, Nathan said quietly. We need the space now. We don't need her. Wyatt. The last one left after 2 days because you're mean, the boy continued, glaring at his father. And the one before that left because Elsie wouldn't stop crying. And the one before that, I know why they left. Nathan's voice was tired. Mrs. Mercer knows what she's getting into. Wyatt turned his glare on Evelyn. You won't last either. Maybe not, Evelyn said. But I'm here now, so you might as well get used to it for however long it takes. She picked up her bag and headed for the sewing room without waiting for permission. The space was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and small dresser Nathan had mentioned. A dusty spinning wheel sat in the corner. Fabric scraps littered the floor. But there was a window with a view of the pine forest, and the bed had clean sheets and the door closed. It was more than she'd had an hour ago. Evelyn set her bag on the dresser and sat down on the bed. Her hands were still shaking. The humiliation in Thornton's store replayed in her mind. Margaret's cruel words, Gerald's weakness, the crowd's hungry eyes. She'd been rejected before, dismissed before, but never quite so publicly. Never with such an audience. You're nearly 50 years old. She looks exhausted. Well, that was true enough. But she was also still standing, still moving forward, still refusing to disappear just because people found her inconvenient. Evelyn stood up, smoothed her dress, and went back out to the main room. Nathan was trying to coax the fire to life. Wyatt had disappeared. Elsie sat exactly where she'd been before, clutching her broken doll and watching Evelyn with enormous, suspicious eyes. "Do you have food?" Evelyn asked. Nathan gestured vaguely toward a cupboard. Some. She investigated. The supplies were meager: flour, beans, salt pork, a few potatoes going soft. Not much, but enough for a basic stew. She'd worked with less. When did these children last have a decent meal? Define decent. Something that isn't burnt or half raw. Nathan actually smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Been a while then. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves. The stove was dirty but functional. The pots needed scrubbing but would work. She found an apron hanging on a hook, probably the late Mrs. Hale's, and tied it on without asking. "You don't have to start tonight," Nathan said. "You just got here." "I'm hungry." "I assume they are too." She built up the fire properly, cleaned a pot, started dicing the potatoes with a knife that desperately needed sharpening. The movements were automatic after decades of cooking in places that barely qualified as kitchens. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind was still reeling from the day's disasters. Nathan watched her for a moment, then went back to whatever carpentry project he was working on near the fireplace. Elsie stayed at the table, silent and watchful. Wyatt reappeared after 20 minutes, drawn by the smell of cooking food. "That smells different," he said suspiciously. "It's stew," Evelyn said without turning around. "The last lady made stew. It was terrible." "Then I guess you'll have to decide if this is terrible too." He didn't leave. When the stew was done, simple, nothing fancy, but hot and properly seasoned, Evelyn ladled it into bowls and set them on the table. Nathan sat down without comment. Elsie climbed into her chair, still clutching the doll. Wyatt hesitated, then sat too. They ate in silence. Evelyn waited for complaints, criticisms, the kind of hostile testing she'd experienced from children before. But Wyatt just ate, his expression carefully neutral. Elsie took tiny bites, her eyes darting between Evelyn and her father like she expected the food to disappear. Nathan ate like a man who'd forgotten what a proper meal tasted like. When his bowl was empty, Wyatt pushed back from the table. "It was okay," he said grudgingly. High praise, apparently. Elsie whispered something too quiet to hear. "What's that, baby?" Nathan asked gently. "Can I have more?" Something cracked in Evelyn's chest. This tiny girl, asking permission for a second helping like it was a special privilege, like she'd been taught not to ask for things. "Of course you can," Evelyn said, ladling more stew into the small bowl. Elsie ate the second helping slowly, savoring each bite. After dinner, Nathan tried to help clean up, but Evelyn waved him off. "You've got work. I've got this." She washed the dishes in water she heated on the stove, dried them with a threadbare towel, put everything away in cupboards that desperately needed organizing. The children disappeared to the loft where they apparently slept. Nathan worked on repairing a broken chair leg, the rhythmic sound of his tools filling the quiet cabin. It was nearly 9 when Evelyn finally finished. The kitchen was cleaner than it had been in months, probably years. Her back ached, her feet hurt. She was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. But the cabin was warmer now. The fire burned steady. The smell of dinner lingered in the air. Nathan looked up from his work. "You didn't have to do all that tonight." "I know. Thank you." The words were simple, but he meant them. Evelyn nodded and retreated to the sewing room. She undressed slowly, her muscles protesting, and put on her nightgown. Through the thin walls, she could hear Nathan moving around, banking the fire, checking on the children. Eventually, his footsteps headed to what must be his room on the other side of the cabin. Then silence. Evelyn lay in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. This morning, she'd been on a train heading toward what she'd hoped would be a new life. Tonight, she was in a stranger's cabin, working for $2 a week, surrounded by grief and anger and need. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was something, a roof, a job, children who needed feeding, and a man who needed help and work that her hands knew how to do. Tomorrow, the town would be talking about her. Gerald Thornton would probably feel guilty. Margaret would be triumphant. The whole mess would become Pine Ridge's favorite story for weeks. Evelyn closed her eyes. Let them talk. She'd survived worse than gossip. She'd survived this too. The thing nobody seemed to understand was that rejection only destroyed you if you believed you needed their acceptance to exist. Evelyn had learned long ago that she could exist just fine without anyone's approval. She could work. She could contribute. She could be useful. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the pine trees. Snow began to fall again, heavy and thick. Winter was settling in for real now. No more trains would be running for weeks, probably months. She was stuck here. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Evelyn felt something almost like relief. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and let exhaustion drag her down into sleep. Her last conscious thought, a question she didn't have an answer for. What exactly had she just gotten herself into? Evelyn woke to the sound of something crashing in the main room. She sat up fast, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness, her heart hammering. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. Pine Ridge, the humiliation, Nathan Hale's cabin, the two grieving children. Another crash followed by angry voices. She pulled on her dress, not bothering with more than the basic fastenings, and opened the door. Wyatt stood in the middle of the kitchen, a broken plate at his feet. Nathan was coming down from the loft, his hair standing up, still in his work clothes from yesterday, like he'd fallen asleep without changing. "It slipped," Wyatt said defensively. "That's the third plate this month." Nathan's voice was rough with sleep and frustration. "We're running out of dishes." "I said it slipped. And I said be more careful. Maybe if you actually bought decent plates instead of the cheap ones." "Wyatt, enough." The boy's face went red. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something worse. But then he saw Evelyn standing in the doorway and his mouth snapped shut. Without another word, he grabbed his coat from the hook and slammed out the front door into the freezing morning. Nathan stood there, looking exhausted in a way that went beyond just lack of sleep. "I'll clean it up," Evelyn said quietly. "You don't have to—" "I know." She found a broom in the corner and swept up the broken ceramic while Nathan went to check on Elsie, who'd started whimpering from the loft. The little girl's cries were soft, like she was trying not to make too much noise, like she'd learned that loud crying didn't get her what she needed. Evelyn dumped the broken plate in the scrap bin and started building up the fire. The cabin was freezing, ice forming on the inside of the windows. She could see her breath. No wonder these children were angry. They were probably cold and hungry most of the time. Nathan came back down carrying Elsie, who had her face buried in his shoulder. "She had a nightmare," he said unnecessarily. "I'll make breakfast." "We don't have much. I saw what you have. I'll manage." She made porridge from the oats she'd found in the cupboard last night, adding a tiny bit of precious sugar and cinnamon that had probably been sitting unused since Mrs. Hale died. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling and better than whatever they'd been eating before she arrived. Elsie ate at the table, still clinging to her broken doll. Nathan ate standing up, like he couldn't spare the time to sit down. Wyatt didn't come back. "He'll be at the woodshed," Nathan said when he noticed Evelyn looking at the empty chair. "He goes there when he's angry, chops wood until he's too tired to be mad anymore." "He's 10 years old." "Yeah, well, he's had to grow up fast." Nathan finished his porridge and set the bowl in the wash basin. "I've got work in town today. A job at the Morrison place. They need their porch rebuilt before the next storm. I'll be gone most of the day." "What do you want me to do?" He looked around the cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. "Whatever you think needs doing, just don't throw anything away without asking first. Some of Sarah's things are still here and the kids get upset if they think I'm trying to erase her." "I understand. And if Wyatt gives you trouble, don't take it personally. He's angry at everyone, not just you." "I've dealt with angry children before." Nathan grabbed his tool bag and coat. At the door he paused. "Thank you for staying, for doing this. You're paying me. Not enough for what you're taking on. Then he was gone, his footsteps crunching through the snow toward town. Evelyn looked at Elsie, who was pushing porridge around her bowl without eating much. "Are you finished, sweetheart?" The little girl nodded. "Can you help me with something?" Elsie's eyes went wide and suspicious, but she nodded again. "I need to figure out what needs cleaning in this house, and I don't know where everything goes. Can you show me?" It was a transparent tactic, but Elsie was 5. She slid off her chair and took Evelyn's hand with her small, cold fingers. They spent the next hour going through the cabin. Elsie showed her where the clean linens were kept, where the winter clothes had been stored, where her mother's good dishes were wrapped in cloth on the highest shelf. She talked more than Evelyn had expected, her voice soft but steady once she got going. "Mama used to make bread on Fridays," Elsie said, pointing to a covered bowl in the corner. "Papa doesn't know how." "I know how to make bread." "Really? I'll teach you if you want." Elsie's face lit up for the first time since Evelyn had arrived. "Can we make some today? We'll need yeast. Does your father have any?" They checked. He didn't. Bread would have to wait. But there was plenty else to do. The cabin was buried under 3 years of accumulated neglect. Not filth, exactly, but the kind of slow decay that happened when people were too tired and heartbroken to care about details. Dust thick on surfaces, clothes that needed mending piled in corners, windows so dirty they barely let in light. Evelyn started with the windows. She heated water, found rags, and began scrubbing years of grime off the glass. Elsie helped, standing on a chair to reach the lower panes. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. It was tedious work, but there was something satisfying about watching the glass go from opaque to clear, letting winter sunlight pour into the dark cabin. They were halfway through the 3rd window when Wyatt came back. He stopped in the doorway, looking at the transformation, the clean windows, the swept floor, the organized kitchen. His expression was unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Cleaning," Evelyn said without stopping her work. "We didn't ask you to." "No, you didn't." He stood there for a minute, clearly trying to decide if he was going to pick a fight. Then he saw Elsie carefully wiping down a windowsill, her face serious and focused, and something in his expression shifted. "You shouldn't make her work," he said. "She's little." "I'm helping," Elsie protested. "You're too small to help with cleaning." "Am not." "Are too." "Wyatt, leave me alone." "Both of you stop," Evelyn said calmly. "Elsie's doing fine. And Wyatt, if you're going to stand there criticizing, you might as well make yourself useful. The wood box is almost empty." He stared at her. "You can't tell me what to do." "You're right, I can't." She went back to scrubbing. "But your father's gone all day and we need firewood to keep warm, so you can either fill the box or you can explain to him tonight why the house was freezing when he got home." Wyatt's jaw tightened. For a moment, Evelyn thought he was going to refuse out of pure spite. Then he turned on his heel and went back outside, letting the door slam behind him. 10 minutes later, she heard the steady thunk of wood being stacked in the box on the porch. Elsie giggled. "He's doing it." "He's a smart boy," Evelyn said. "Smart boys know when they're beat." By midday, the cabin looked different. Not perfect. It would take weeks to undo 3 years of neglect, but better, cleaner. The windows sparkled. The floor was swept. The dishes were washed and put away properly. Evelyn had even managed to organize the chaotic cupboards into something resembling order. She made lunch from the meager supplies, toasted bread with the last of the butter, weak tea, some wrinkled apples from the cold cellar. Wyatt came in when she called him, his face red from the cold and exertion. He'd filled the wood box completely, then kept going and stacked extra against the side of the cabin. He ate without talking, but he ate everything on his plate. After lunch, Evelyn found the pile of mending she'd noticed the night before. Torn shirts, loose buttons, socks with holes. She settled into the rocking chair near the fireplace and started working through it. The children disappeared to play, or whatever they did when adults weren't watching. The afternoon wore on. Snow began falling again, soft and steady. The cabin was warm for the first time since she'd arrived, the fire burning steady and strong thanks to Wyatt's wood. Evelyn's fingers moved automatically through the mending, muscle memory from decades of similar work. She was halfway through reattaching a button when Elsie appeared at her elbow. "Can you fix Lily?" the little girl asked quietly. She held out the broken doll. Evelyn set down the shirt and examined the toy. One arm was torn completely off, the stuffing coming out. The fabric was stained and worn, but the doll had clearly been loved. You could see it in how the edges were softened from being held, how the face was faded from kisses. "Who's Lily?" "My doll. Mama made her before she got sick." Elsie's voice was very small. "Wyatt says she's just a stupid toy, but she's not. She's important." "She's very important," Evelyn agreed. "Let me see what I can do." She found Sarah Hale's sewing basket in the corner, still full of thread and needles and fabric scraps. It felt intrusive using a dead woman's things, but Nathan had said not to throw anything away. He hadn't said she couldn't use them. Evelyn worked carefully, reattaching the arm with small, tight stitches. She restuffed it with cotton from an old pillow, then reinforced the weak seams. When she was finished, the doll wasn't like new. The stains were still there, the wear still visible, but she was whole again. "There, Evelyn said, handing Lily back. Elsie hugged the doll to her chest, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome, sweetheart." The little girl stood there for a moment, then impulsively wrapped her arms around Evelyn's neck. The hug was quick, fierce, and over before Evelyn could react. Then Elsie was running off to show Wyatt the repaired doll, her voice high and excited. Evelyn sat very still, something tight in her throat. When was the last time someone had hugged her? She couldn't remember. The door opened and Nathan came in, stamping snow off his boots. He looked exhausted, his face windburned, his hands red from the cold. But he stopped when he saw the cabin. "You did all this?" Elsie helped with the windows. Wyatt brought in enough wood to last a week. Nathan walked slowly through the space, taking it in. The clean windows, the organized kitchen, the mended clothes folded in a neat pile, his children playing quietly in the corner, Elsie showing her brother the repaired doll. "I didn't think it could look like this anymore," he said quietly. "It just needed attention." "It needed more than I could give it." He turned to look at her. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "It's what you're paying me for." "Right, of course." But he looked almost disappointed, though Evelyn couldn't figure out why. They fell into a routine over the next week. Nathan would leave before dawn for whatever carpentry job he'd lined up. Evelyn would get the children fed, then tackle another section of the cabin's neglect. She cleaned the loft where the children slept, hauled their mattresses outside to air, washed their bedding in water she heated pot by pot on the stove. She reorganized the cold cellar, cleaned out the chicken coop they'd been ignoring, repaired torn curtains. Wyatt remained wary but less openly hostile. He'd test her sometimes, deliberately tracking mud through her clean floors, leaving tools where she'd trip over them, making comments designed to hurt. But Evelyn had dealt with difficult children before. She didn't rise to the bait. She just quietly cleaned up the mud, moved the tools, and ignored the comments. After a few days, the testing slowed down. Elsie, on the other hand, attached herself to Evelyn like a shadow. She followed her from room to room, helping with tasks she was too small to actually help with, chattering about everything and nothing. She talked about her mother sometimes, fragments of memories from when she was 2 and 3 years old, before the sickness came. "Mama used to sing when she cooked," Elsie said one afternoon while they were peeling potatoes together. "Papa doesn't sing anymore. Maybe he doesn't know the songs." "He knows them, he just won't." Elsie was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to leave like the other ladies?" "What other ladies?" "The ones Papa hired to help. They all left. Wyatt says it's because we're too broken to fix." Evelyn set down the potato she was peeling and looked at this little girl who carried too much understanding in her 5-year-old heart. "You're not broken, sweetheart. Wyatt says we are." "Wyatt's angry and hurt and scared, so he says things that aren't true." Evelyn touched Elsie's cheek gently. "You're not broken. None of you are. You're just sad, and that's different." "Are you sad too?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. "Sometimes. Because that man didn't want to marry you?" Word traveled fast in small towns. "Among other reasons." "I'm glad he didn't," Elsie said seriously, "because then you wouldn't be here." Something cracked open in Evelyn's chest. That night Nathan stayed at the dinner table after eating. Usually he bolted his food and went back to work, fixing furniture, sharpening tools, doing the endless repairs the cabin needed. But tonight he sat there, nursing a cup of coffee, watching Evelyn clean up. "You don't have to do that every night," he said. "The dishes, I mean. We could help. It's faster if I just do it." Still, She dried her hands and turned to face him. What's this really about? I've been thinking. He looked uncomfortable. About the arrangement we have. $2 a week isn't enough for what you're doing here. It's what we agreed on. I know, but... He ran a hand through his hair. You're not just cooking and cleaning. You're bringing this place back to life. The kids are different. They're eating better, sleeping better. Elsie smiles now. Even Wyatt's starting to thaw out, though he'd never admit it. That's what happens when children are properly cared for. Exactly. And I can't pay you what that's actually worth, but I want to try. $3 a week? Nathan, and I've been thinking about the sleeping arrangements. That room you're in is barely big enough to turn around. I could build you a proper bedroom off the back of the cabin. Nothing fancy, but bigger, with a real window and space for your things. Evelyn stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I don't want you leaving. The words hung in the air between them. I mean, Nathan backtracked quickly. The kids need you, and I need the help. And it seems stupid to give you the worst room in the house when you're the one making everything work. I'm not looking for charity. It's not charity, it's practicality. He stood up, suddenly restless. Look, I know this isn't what you came to Pine Ridge for. I know you were supposed to get married and have a real life, not end up as hired help in some widower's falling apart cabin. But you're here now, and you're good at this. And I don't want to lose that because you decide you'd rather be somewhere else. Where else would I go? I don't know. Back to Philadelphia. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere that isn't Pine Ridge with its gossiping busybodies and harsh winters. And he stopped. I'm just saying I want you to stay, if you want to stay. Did she want to stay? A month ago, Evelyn would have said no without hesitation. This was supposed to be temporary, a place to land until she figured out her next move. She'd never planned on settling in Pine Ridge, certainly not in a cabin at the edge of town working for a widowed carpenter and his damaged children. But something had shifted in the past week. She liked the work, not in some noble, self-sacrificing way, but genuinely liked it. She liked bringing order to chaos. She liked watching the cabin transform. She liked Elsie's chatter and even Wyatt's grudging acceptance. She liked the way Nathan looked at her sometimes, not with pity or judgment, but with something closer to respect. I'll stay through the winter, she said finally. After that, we'll see. Relief flooded Nathan's face. That's fair. Thank you. He went back to his work and Evelyn finished the dishes, but something had changed in the cabin's atmosphere. A decision had been made, a commitment, however temporary. That weekend, Nathan started building the addition. He worked from dawn until dark, sawing and hammering, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Wyatt helped without being asked, holding boards steady, fetching tools. Even Elsie tried to help, bringing her father water and nails. The town noticed. Women started showing up at the cabin, ostensibly to welcome Evelyn properly, but really to see what was happening. They'd bring small gifts, a jar of preserves, some extra flour, hand-me-down clothes for the children, and ask pointed questions. Nathan's building you a bedroom? Mrs. Morrison said, her eyes sharp with curiosity. My, that's quite an undertaking. The cabin needs more space, Evelyn said neutrally. Still, people might talk. A woman living alone with a man and his children's. People are already talking. They started the day I arrived. Mrs. Morrison had the grace to look embarrassed. Well, yes, that business with Gerald Thornton was unfortunate. It was what it was. Another woman, Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house, was more direct. You know Nathan Hale's good man, but he's struggling. That carpentry business barely keeps them fed. If you're expecting comfort or security here, I'm expecting to work hard and earn my wages, Evelyn interrupted. That's all. But the visits kept coming, and Evelyn started to understand what was really happening. The town was trying to figure out where she fit. Was she a servant, a charity case, something else entirely? They couldn't quite categorize her, and it made them nervous. Margaret, Gerald Thornton's sister-in-law, showed up on a particularly cold Tuesday afternoon. I wanted to apologize, she said stiffly when Evelyn opened the door. For what happened at the store. I was harsh. You were honest. Perhaps too honest. Margaret looked past Evelyn into the clean, warm cabin. May I come in? Evelyn hesitated, then stepped aside. Margaret walked through the space, taking in the changes, the organized kitchen, the mended curtains, the children's clean clothes hanging to dry by the fire. Her expression was unreadable. You've done well here, she said finally. Thank you. Nathan Hale is lucky to have found you. He's paying me to work. It's not luck, it's employment. Margaret turned to face her. Is that really all it is? What else would it be? I see the way he looks at you. Evelyn felt her face heat. You're mistaken. Am I? Margaret sat down at the table without being invited. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I feel guilty. Gerald wanted to marry you, but I talked him out of it. I told him you were too old, too worn down, that you'd just be another burden. You were probably right. I wasn't, though. That's what I'm trying to say. Margaret's voice was bitter. I've been running Gerald's store for 2 years, keeping everything afloat while he mourns his dead wife. I'm 40 years old, unmarried, working myself to death for a man who'll never see me as anything but his late wife's sister. And then you show up, and I see what I could have been if I'd had half your courage. I'm not courageous. I'm just stubborn. Same thing sometimes. Margaret stood. I really am sorry. What I did to you in that store was cruel, and you didn't deserve it. Apology accepted. Margaret headed for the door, then paused. Word of advice? Don't let this town tell you what you're worth. They tried to tell me I was only valuable as free labor, and I believed them. Don't make the same mistake. After she left, Evelyn stood in the quiet cabin and thought about worth. What was she worth? $2 a week, now $3. The price of room and board. The value of clean floors and mended clothes and children who finally smiled sometimes. Was that enough? It was more than she'd had before. The new bedroom was finished 2 weeks after Nathan started it. It wasn't large, maybe twice the size of the sewing room, but it had a real bed frame he'd built himself, a proper dresser, a window that actually opened, and enough space for Evelyn to move around without bumping into furniture. It's wonderful, she said, meaning it. Nathan looked pleased and embarrassed. It's just a bedroom. It's mine. That makes it wonderful. She moved her few possessions into the new space that afternoon. It didn't take long. She still owned almost nothing, but arranging her belongings on the dresser, hanging her dresses in the small closet Nathan had built, putting her mother's photograph on the bedside table, it felt like claiming something, like putting down roots, however tentative. That night she slept better than she had in years. January turned into February. The snow kept falling, piling up in drifts that reached the cabin's windows. Nathan worked when he could, though the brutal weather kept him home more often. Evelyn taught Elsie her letters. Wyatt started bringing her problems from his arithmetic homework without being asked. The three of them fell into rhythms that felt almost like family. Almost. On a particularly brutal Sunday, when it was too cold to go to town for church services, Nathan suggested they play cards. Evelyn dug out a battered deck from Sarah's sewing basket, and they gathered around the table, her, Nathan, Wyatt, and Elsie, who was too young to really understand the game but loved being included. They played until dark, laughing at Wyatt's terrible bluffs and Elsie's creative interpretation of the rules. At some point, Nathan's hand brushed Evelyn's while reaching for a card, and they both froze for just a second before pulling away. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Nathan built up the fire while Evelyn cleaned up the cards. Today was good, he said quietly. It was. I haven't seen the kids that happy in a long time. They're good kids. They just needed someone to pay attention. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Sarah used to say that, about paying attention. She said most problems came from people not bothering to really look at each other. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly. Evelyn carefully set down the cards. She sounds like she was wise. She was. Sharp as a tack, took no nonsense from anyone, loved those kids fiercer than anything. His voice was rough. I wasn't ready to lose her. You're never ready, but I especially wasn't. How long were you married? 8 years? Met her when I was 22 and she was 19. Married 6 months later because waiting seemed stupid when we knew. He stared into the fire. Then she got sick when Elsie was 2. Lasted 6 months before the fever took her, and I've been trying to keep everything from falling apart ever since. You've done better than you think. Have I? My son's angry all the time. My daughter cries herself to sleep most nights. The house was falling down around our ears before you got here. But you kept trying. That counts for something. Nathan looked at her finally. You're the first person who's made it feel like maybe trying is actually worth something. The air between them felt different suddenly, charged. Evelyn stood up quickly. I should get to bed. Tomorrow's washing day. Right. Of course. She retreated to her new bedroom and closed the door, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. This was dangerous territory. She was an employee. He was her employer. There were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn found herself wanting to cross them anyway. She tried not to think about it. The dangerous feelings. The way Nathan's eyes lingered on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. The way her pulse jumped when his hand accidentally brushed hers. The way the cabin felt less like a job and more like a home with each passing day. Evelyn threw herself into work instead. She scrubbed floors that were already clean. She reorganized cupboards that didn't need reorganizing. She kept her hands busy and her mind occupied and told herself that what she was feeling was just gratitude mixed with loneliness. Nothing more. But then came the morning that changed everything. It was early March, still brutally cold, but with hints of spring starting to show in the longer days. Evelyn was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard a thud from the hallway, followed by a sharp cry. She dropped the spoon and ran. Elsie lay on the floor, her face crumpled in pain, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd slipped on the rag rug, the one that had been bunching up for weeks, and that Evelyn kept meaning to fix. I fell, Elsie sobbed. It hurts. Evelyn scooped her up without thinking, holding the little girl close, checking for injuries. Nothing broken, just a hard landing that had scared her more than hurt her. But Elsie was crying like her heart was breaking, the kind of deep, shaking sobs that weren't really about the fall at all. Shh, sweetheart, you're okay, Evelyn murmured, carrying her to the rocking chair. You're okay. I've got you. She sat down and held Elsie in her lap, rocking gently, stroking her tangled hair. The little girl buried her face against Evelyn's shoulder and cried harder, her small body trembling. Does it hurt that bad? Should I get your father? Elsie shook her head violently. Then what is it, baby? Talk to me. I want... Elsie's voice broke. I want my mama. Evelyn's throat closed up. I know, sweetheart. I know you do. But she's gone and she's never coming back and I can't remember her face anymore. The words tumbled out between sobs. I try to remember, but I can't. And Wyatt says that means I didn't love her enough. But I did. I did love her. Of course you loved her, and she loved you. Then why can't I remember? Because you were very little when she died. That's not your fault. Elsie cried harder, and Evelyn just held her, letting her get it all out. All the grief and confusion and anger that a 5-year-old shouldn't have to carry. After a while, the sobs quieted to hiccups, and Elsie's breathing started to even out. I miss having a mama, she whispered finally. Evelyn's heart cracked wide open. I know you do. Elsie pulled back just enough to look up at Evelyn with red, swollen eyes. Her face was blotchy and wet, her nose running. She looked like a mess. She looked like she needed someone to love her so badly it physically hurt. And then she said it. One word, barely audible. Mama? The question hung in the air between them. Evelyn went completely still. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because she knew what that word meant, what it would mean if she accepted it. From the doorway, Nathan's voice was rough. Elsie? Evelyn looked up. She hadn't heard him come in from the woodshed. He stood frozen, his face pale, staring at his daughter in Evelyn's arms. Wyatt was there too, standing slightly behind his father, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Elsie said quickly, starting to pull away. I didn't mean... No, sweetheart. It's okay. Evelyn tried to hold on to her, but the little girl was scrambling down, her face flushing with shame. I'm sorry, she said again, this time to her father. I know she's not really... I know... Elsie. Nathan's voice cracked. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt down in front of his daughter. Listen to me. You don't have to apologize for missing your mother. You don't have to apologize for wanting someone to... He stopped, swallowed hard. For wanting what you need. But I called her Akirsh. I know what you called her. The room went silent, except for Elsie's shaky breathing. Nathan looked at Evelyn then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that terrified her. Not anger, not disapproval. Recognition. He saw it too. The way his children had attached themselves to her. The way the cabin had transformed from a place of survival into something that almost felt like a family. The way everything had shifted without any of them meaning for it to happen. "Go wash your face," Nathan told Elsie gently. "Breakfast is getting cold." Elsie fled to the wash basin. Wyatt disappeared back outside. Nathan stood slowly, still looking at Evelyn. "We should talk," he said quietly. "I didn't encourage her to—" "I know you didn't." He ran a hand through his hair. "But we still need to talk. Tonight, after the kids are asleep." Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. The rest of the day felt like waiting for an execution. She went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, helping Wyatt with his homework, braiding Elsie's hair. But her mind was elsewhere, playing out every possible version of the conversation to come. Nathan would tell her she'd overstepped, that she'd gotten too close to the children, that the arrangement wasn't working anymore, that she needed to leave, and maybe he'd be right. Dinner was quiet and tense. Even Elsie, who usually chattered through meals, ate in silence. Wyatt kept glancing between his father and Evelyn like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Nathan barely touched his food. After dinner, Evelyn cleaned up while Nathan got the children ready for bed. She could hear him upstairs, his voice low as he read them a story. Elsie's soft questions, Wyatt's occasional comment, then silence. Nathan came back down, closing the loft door quietly behind him. He poured himself coffee, offered some to Evelyn. She shook her head. Her stomach was already churning. He sat down at the table. After a moment, she sat across from him. "I'm not angry," he said first. "Okay? And I'm not asking you to leave." Some of the tension in her shoulders eased. "Okay? But we need to be honest about what's happening here." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "When I hired you, it was supposed to be simple. You'd cook and clean, I'd pay you, everyone would benefit. That's all." "I know. But it hasn't stayed simple, has it?" Evelyn looked down at her hands. "No. The kids are attached to you, really attached. Elsie, obviously, but Wyatt, too, even if he won't admit it. They haven't been this settled in 3 years, and I—" He stopped. "You what?" "I've gotten used to you being here. More than used to it." His voice was rough. "I wake up, and the first thing I think about is whether you're awake yet. I come home from work, and the cabin feels different, better, because you're in it. I catch myself watching you with the kids and thinking about things I have no business thinking about." Evelyn's heart was hammering. "Nathan, let me finish." He looked at her finally. "I'm not asking you for anything. I know this is just a job for you. I know you were supposed to marry Gerald Thornton and build a real life, and instead you got stuck here with a struggling carpenter and his broken family. I'm not trying to put that on you, but I need you to know that this stopped being simple for me a long time ago." "It stopped being simple for me too," Evelyn said quietly. He went very still. "What?" "I didn't want it to. I told myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or—" She made herself look at him. "But it's not. When Elsie called me that this morning, part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to be what she was asking for, and that terrifies me because I don't know what that means, or where it leads, or if I'm just fooling myself into thinking—" She couldn't finish. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "I don't have much to offer you," he said. "A cabin that's still falling apart. 2 kids who come with a lot of pain. A business that barely keeps us fed. I'm 32 years old, and most days I feel twice that. I'm not the man you were supposed to end up with. Gerald Thornton was the man I was supposed to end up with. And look how that turned out." "I'm serious, Evelyn." "So am I." She squeezed his hand. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? A man who kept trying even when everything fell apart. A man who loves his children enough to ask for help when he needs it. A man who crossed a street to defend a stranger because it was the right thing to do. That's worth more than comfort or security, or any of the things I thought I was looking for." "You don't know what you're saying." "I'm 48 years old, Nathan. I know exactly what I'm saying." They sat there, hands clasped across the table, the fire crackling in the hearth. Outside, wind howled through the pines. Inside, something fundamental was shifting. "So what do we do?" Nathan asked finally. "I don't know." "That's honest, at least." Evelyn laughed shakily. "I've spent my whole life being practical. Working hard, keeping my head down, not expecting anything I couldn't earn myself. And now I'm sitting here wanting something I have no idea how to ask for. Ask anyway. I want to stay. Not as hired help. Not temporarily. She took a breath. I want to stay as part of this family, if you'll have me. Nathan's grip on her hand tightened. Evelyn. The door slammed open. They both jumped, hands flying apart like they'd been caught doing something wrong. Wyatt stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his face red with anger and something else, something that looked like betrayal. I knew it, he said. His voice shook. I knew you were trying to replace her. Wyatt, no! Nathan stood up. Don't lie to me. I heard everything. I heard what you said to her. Wyatt's eyes were bright with tears he was fighting not to shed. You're just going to forget Mama ever existed. You're going to bring in someone new and pretend like she was never here. That's not what's happening, Tuma. Then what is happening? Wyatt shouted. Because it sounds like you're trying to get yourself a new wife. And Elsie's already calling her Mama like our real mother doesn't even matter anymore. Your mother will always matter, Nathan said, his voice strained. Always. Nothing and no one could ever change that. But you're replacing her anyway. I'm not replacing her. I'm trying to... Nathan stopped, struggling for words. I'm trying to live, Wyatt. I'm trying to give you and your sister a life that's more than just surviving every day. Can't you understand that? I understand that you forgot about Mama the second someone new showed up. That's not fair, but... Nothing's fair. Nothing's been fair since she died. Wyatt was crying now, angry tears streaming down his face. And now you're just going to act like she never existed because it's easier to start over than remember. Wyatt, please. But the boy turned and ran, disappearing into the dark cabin. Nathan moved to follow him, but Evelyn touched his arm. Let me try. He's my son, and he's hurt and angry, and he doesn't want to hear from you right now. Let me try. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. Evelyn found Wyatt in the woodshed, sitting on the pile of logs he'd stacked weeks ago, his face buried in his arms. She could hear him crying, harsh, painful sobs that he was trying to muffle. She sat down beside him without saying anything. For a long time they just sat there in the cold dark, his crying the only sound. Finally, his voice came out muffled and broken. I don't want to forget her. You won't. But I am. I can't remember what her voice sounded like anymore. And sometimes I look at her picture and I don't feel anything, and that scares me because what if I stop missing her? What if she just becomes someone I used to know? Evelyn's throat was tight. That won't happen. How do you know? Because love doesn't work that way. The people we love don't disappear just because time passes or because we find new people to love too. They stay with us. They become part of who we are. Wyatt lifted his head, his face blotchy and wet. You don't understand. You didn't know her. You're right, I didn't. But I know what it's like to lose people who matter. And I know that holding on to pain isn't the same as honoring their memory. What's that supposed to mean? It means your mother wouldn't want you to be this angry forever. She'd want you to be happy, to have a life, to let people in even when it's scary. You don't know what she'd want. No, but your father does. And he loved her more than anything. So if he's trying to move forward, maybe it's because that's what she would have wanted. Not forgetting, just living. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. I heard Elsie call you Mama. I know. Does that mean you want to be our mother? The question was so direct it caught her off guard. I want to be part of your family, if you'll let me. We already have a mother. You do. You always will. Nothing changes that. Evelyn chose her words carefully. But maybe there's room for both. For honoring who she was and accepting help from someone new. They don't have to cancel each other out. It feels wrong. I know it does. And if it keeps feeling wrong, then we'll figure something else out. But maybe give it a chance first. See if it's as terrible as you think. Wyatt wiped his face with his sleeve. You're going to leave eventually anyway. Everyone does. What if I promise not to? Promises don't mean anything. They do to me. He looked at her, this angry, hurt 10-year-old who was trying so hard to be grown up. Why do you even want to stay? We're a mess. Papa barely makes enough money. Elsie cries all the time. He stopped. You're what? I'm mean. I know I'm mean. I've been mean to you since you got here, and you should hate me for it, but you just keep being nice, and I don't understand why. Because you're worth being nice to, even when you're difficult. Nobody else thinks so. Then nobody else is paying attention. Wyatt made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let you be here without feeling like I'm betraying Mama. You're not betraying her. You're just trying to survive. That's all any of us are doing. They sat in silence for a while longer. Finally, Wyatt stood up, brushing sawdust off his pants. I'm not calling you Mama, he said. I don't expect you to. And I'm probably still going to be mean sometimes. I can handle it. And if you do leave, if you break your promise, I'll never forgive you. Fair enough. He headed for the door, then paused. Evelyn? Yes? Don't hurt my father. He's already been hurt enough. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn sitting alone in the cold woodshed with tears running down her face. When she came back inside, Nathan was standing by the fire, staring into the flames. He turned when he heard her. Is he okay? He will be, eventually. I handled that badly. You handled it like a father who's trying his best. That's all anyone can ask. Nathan crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. All right. What Wyatt said about promises, about you leaving. His jaw tightened. Are you going to? Because I need to know now before this goes any further, before my kids get more attached, before I... He stopped. Before you what? Before I fall completely in love with you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Nathan's face flushed. I shouldn't have said that. Forget I... Don't. Evelyn grabbed his hand. Don't take it back. Evelyn? I'm not leaving. I told Wyatt, and I'm telling you, I'm not leaving. You can't know that for sure. What if something changes? What if you wake up one day and realize you've made a mistake? Then I'll deal with it. But I'm not going to spend my life running from good things just because they might end badly. She looked up at him. I'm 48 years old, Nathan. I've spent decades being practical and careful and protecting myself from disappointment. And you know what it got me? A life that was safe and empty and lonely. So yes, this is terrifying. Yes, I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm choosing to stay anyway. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm home. Nathan pulled her into his arms then, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She wrapped her arms around him and held on just as hard, feeling his heart racing against her chest. I don't know how to do this, he said into her hair. I don't know how to start over, how to be with someone who isn't Sarah. I'm not asking you to forget her. I'm just asking you to make room for me too. I think I already have. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, the fire warming the cabin and the night settling in around them. The next morning, the whole town knew. Evelyn wasn't sure how word spread so fast. Maybe one of the children mentioned something at school, or maybe Mrs. Morrison had been passing by and seen them through the window. But by the time she went into town for supplies, the whispers had already started. She was browsing fabric at the general store when she heard Margaret's voice behind her. So the rumors are true then? Evelyn turned. Margaret stood there with Mrs. Chen and two other women Evelyn recognized from church, all of them watching her with varying degrees of judgment and curiosity. What rumors? That you and Nathan Hale are getting married. Evelyn's stomach dropped. We're not, that's not... But you're living in his house, Mrs. Chen said, raising his children. People are talking, Evelyn. Let them talk. It's not proper, one of the other women said. A woman living alone with a man, no matter what the circumstances. I'm working for him. It's employment. Is it? Margaret's eyes were sharp. Because it looks like something else from where we're standing. Evelyn felt her face heat. What I do with my life is my business. Not when it affects the whole town. Mrs. Chen leaned closer. You need to understand, we have standards here. Propriety matters. And a woman your age living in sin with a younger man, I'm not living in sin with anyone. Then what would you call it? The store had gone quiet. Other customers were watching now, listening to every word. Evelyn felt trapped, cornered by their judgment, and her own inability to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. I'd call it none of your business, a new voice said. Evelyn turned. Nathan stood in the doorway, Elsie's hand in his, Wyatt beside him. He looked calm, but there was steel in his eyes. "Nathan," Mrs. Chen said, flustered, you were just telling Evelyn what you think she should do with her life. I heard." He crossed to Evelyn's side. "You done with your shopping?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Let's go." He picked up her basket and guided her toward the door, the children following. Outside, Evelyn finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." Nathan set the basket in the wagon. "Those women need to mind their own business. They're just enjoying having someone new to judge." His voice was hard. "I've lived in this town my whole life. I know how it works. Someone steps outside the lines they've drawn, and suddenly everyone's an expert on morality and proper behavior. They have a point, though, about appearances." Nathan turned to face her. "Do you care what they think?" Evelyn stopped. Did she? "I don't want to make things harder for you, or the children. The children are fine, better than fine. They're happy for the first time in 3 years. That's what matters. But the town can go to hell." Elsie gasped. "Papa, you said a bad word." Despite everything, Evelyn almost laughed. Nathan's expression softened. "You're right, baby. I'm sorry, but I stand by the sentiment." They drove home in silence, the children chattering in the back of the wagon. When they reached the cabin, Nathan helped Evelyn down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "I meant what I said last night," he told her quietly, "about how I feel, about wanting you to stay. I know, but I also need to do right by you, by your reputation. Nathan, marry me." Evelyn's breath caught. "What? Marry me. Properly. Make it official so the whole town can stop their gossiping and the kids can stop worrying and we can just—" He stopped, looking suddenly vulnerable. "We can just be a family." "You're asking me to marry you in a wagon in front of your children? Is that a no?" "It's a—" Evelyn looked at his face, earnest and hopeful and scared. Looked at Elsie, watching them with huge eyes. At Wyatt, whose expression was carefully neutral but whose hands were clenched tight. "It's a yes, but we're doing this right." "What does that mean?" "It means you're asking me properly. Not because the town is gossiping or because it's practical, because you actually want to." Nathan smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since she arrived. "Yes, ma'am." That night, after dinner and after the children were asleep, he asked her again, down on one knee in front of the fire, holding a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. "Evelyn Mercer, will you marry me? Not because it's practical or proper, but because I love you and I want you in my life for whatever time we have left. Will you be my wife?" This time, when she said yes, he kissed her. And for the first time in 48 years, Evelyn felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But word of the engagement spread through Pine Ridge faster than the proposal itself had happened. By the next morning, half the town seemed to have an opinion about it. Most of them weren't good. Evelyn was hanging laundry when Mrs. Morrison appeared at the fence, her face pinched with disapproval. "I heard the news," she said, without preamble. "You're actually going through with it then." "Good morning to you too," Evelyn replied, continuing to pin sheets to the line. "Don't you think this is all rather sudden? You've been here less than 3 months." "I'm 48 years old, Mrs. Morrison. I don't have time to waste on long courtships." "But Nathan Hale, he's so much younger than you. And those children need a proper mother, not—" She stopped herself. "Not what?" Evelyn turned to face her fully. "Say it." Mrs. Morrison's face flushed. "Not someone who's just looking for security. You think that's what this is? Me using Nathan for a roof over my head? I think it's convenient for both of you. He needs help with his children. You need a home. But marriage, that's a sacred thing, Evelyn, not a business arrangement." "You're right," Evelyn said quietly. "It is sacred, which is why I wouldn't enter into it lightly." "Then what would you call this?" "I'd call it two people who found each other when they weren't looking. I'd call it honest, and I'd call it none of your concern." Mrs. Morrison's mouth tightened. "The whole town is concerned. We have standards here, morals, and watching a woman your age chase after a man nearly 20 years younger—" 16 years, Evelyn corrected. "And I'm not chasing anyone. He asked me." "Only because you put yourself in a position where he had no choice." The accusation stung because part of Evelyn had worried about the same thing. Had she manipulated this somehow? Made herself indispensable so Nathan felt obligated? But then she remembered the way he'd looked at her when he proposed, the way his hand shook when he slid the ring onto her finger, the way he'd kissed her like she was something precious. That wasn't obligation. "Believe what you want," Evelyn said. "We're getting married regardless." Mrs. Morrison left in a huff, but she wasn't the last visitor that week. Mrs. Chen stopped by with thinly veiled concerns about the children's welfare. The blacksmith's wife came to ask pointed questions about Evelyn's past. Even the minister showed up, looking uncomfortable, to suggest that perhaps they should wait a bit longer before making such a permanent decision. "People are talking," he said carefully, "and not kindly. I just want to make sure you've both thought this through." "We have," Nathan said from the doorway. He'd been working on the porch railing, but came in when he heard the minister's voice. "With all due respect, Reverend, our decision is made." "I understand, but the appearance of impropriety—" "The appearance," Nathan interrupted, "is a woman living alone in a house with a man she's not married to. So we're fixing that. We're getting married. Seems like that should make everyone happy." It's the speed of it that concerns people. People weren't concerned when I was raising 2 kids alone in a falling-down cabin. They weren't concerned when my son was getting in fights at school or my daughter was crying herself to sleep every night. But now that things are actually getting better, suddenly everyone's worried about propriety? The minister shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just trying to help." "Then marry us and tell the gossips to find someone else to talk about." After he left, Nathan slammed a cabinet door hard enough to rattle the dishes. "They're never going to accept this," he said. "Probably not." "Doesn't that bother you?" Evelyn thought about it. "Not as much as going back to who I was before I came here. That woman was alone and invisible and convinced she didn't deserve better. If the price of having this," she gestured around the cabin, "is some disapproving looks and whispered gossip, I'll pay it." Nathan's expression softened. "You're tougher than you look." "I've had to be." But the real test came 3 days later when Gerald Thornton showed up at the cabin. Evelyn was kneading bread dough when she heard the knock. Nathan was in town on a job. The children were at school. She wiped flour from her hands and opened the door. Gerald stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking older and more worn than she remembered from that humiliating day in his store. "Mr. Thornton," she said coolly. "Miss Mercer, or I suppose it's going to be Mrs. Hale soon." He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "May I come in?" Every instinct told her to say no, but curiosity won out. She stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around the cabin, taking in the clean floors, the organized kitchen, the comfortable warmth. "You've done well for yourself. Was there something you needed?" "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, for letting Margaret bully me into—" He stopped. "I was a coward, and you deserved better." "Yes, I did." Gerald flinched at her bluntness. "I've been thinking about those letters we exchanged, about what might have been if I'd had more courage." "Don't," Evelyn said sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Romanticize a future that was never going to happen. You didn't want me, Gerald. You made that very clear in front of half the town." "I was scared. Margaret made me doubt myself, and you threw me away like garbage because it was easier than standing up to your dead wife's sister." Evelyn crossed her arms. "So why are you really here? Because it's not to apologize. You could have done that weeks ago." Gerald's face reddened. "I heard you're marrying Nathan Hale." "That's right. And I wanted to make sure you understood what you're getting into. Nathan's a good man, but he's struggling. His business barely makes money. Those kids are damaged. You'd be taking on a lot of hardship for what? Love? Companionship? A real family?" Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're unbelievable. You rejected me when I had nothing to offer but myself, and now that someone else wants me, suddenly you're concerned about my welfare. That's not— I'm trying to look out for you. No, you're trying to salve your conscience. Or maybe you're just upset that the woman you discarded found something better." She walked to the door and opened it. "Either way, I'm not interested. You had your chance, and you chose to humiliate me. I'm choosing Nathan, and unlike you, I'm not going to change my mind when it gets hard." "Evelyn, please. It's Mrs. Hale, and you need to leave." Gerald stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say more. Then he put his hat back on and left without another word. Evelyn closed the door and leaned against it, her hands shaking. Part of her had wondered if she'd feel vindicated, having the man who rejected her come crawling back. Instead, she just felt tired. Tired of proving herself. Tired of justifying her choices. Tired of people who couldn't see her value until someone else did. That night, she told Nathan about the visit. "He came here?" Nathan's voice was dangerous. "To my house?" "It's fine. I sent him away." "It's not fine. He has no right." Nathan stood up, pacing. "I should go talk to him." "And say what? That you'll defend my honor?" Evelyn caught his hand. "I already did that myself. I don't need you to fight my battles." "I know you don't need me to. I want to." "Why?" "Because he hurt you. And Nathan stopped, struggling with the words. "I hate that he made you feel like you weren't worth fighting for. Because you are. You're worth everything." Evelyn pulled him close, resting her forehead against his chest. "I know that now, because of you." They decided to get married quickly, not because of the gossip, though that was getting worse, but because waiting felt pointless. They'd already made their decision. Why drag it out? The minister agreed to perform the ceremony on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks from the day Nathan proposed. It would be small, just them, the children, and whoever from town wanted to show up. Evelyn didn't expect many people. She was right. The day of the wedding dawned cold and clear. Evelyn woke early in her room, staring at the simple dress she'd chosen to wear. It wasn't white. She was too old and too practical for that. But a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. She'd altered it herself, adding lace at the collar that had belonged to Nathan's grandmother. Elsie burst in without knocking, already dressed in her best Sunday clothes. "Are you nervous?" the little girl asked. "A little." "Don't be. Papa's been smiling all week. He hasn't smiled like that since before Mama died." The mention of Sarah should have stung, but it didn't. They'd talked about it, she and Nathan, about how to honor his first wife's memory while still building something new. Wyatt had been part of those conversations too, grudgingly at first, then with more openness. "You ready to have me as your stepmother?" Evelyn asked. Elsie climbed onto the bed beside her. "I'm ready to have you as my mama, if that's okay." Evelyn's throat tightened. "It's more than okay, sweetheart." They arrived at the church an hour before the ceremony. Evelyn expected it to be nearly empty, but there were more people than she'd anticipated. Mrs. Chen was there, looking uncomfortable, but present. The blacksmith and his wife. A few of Nathan's carpentry clients. Margaret sat in the back, her expression unreadable. And in the front row, to Evelyn's shock, sat Mrs. Morrison. When their eyes met, the older woman gave a small nod. Not approval exactly, but acknowledgement. It would have to be enough. Nathan stood at the altar in his best suit, the one he'd clearly owned for years but had pressed and cleaned until it looked almost new. His hair was neatly combed, his face was clean-shaven. He looked nervous and young and absolutely terrified. When he saw Evelyn walking down the aisle, everything else fell away. She wasn't beautiful by any conventional standard. She knew that. She was too old, too worn down by life, too ordinary. But the way Nathan looked at her made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. Wyatt walked beside her, having agreed to give her away after much coaxing from Elsie. He was stiff and formal, clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing, but he was there. That was what mattered. The ceremony was brief. The minister spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. Evelyn barely heard him. She was too focused on Nathan's face, on the way his hands shook when he slid the ring onto her finger, on the tears in his eyes when he said, "I do." When it was her turn, her voice was steady. "I do." And then Nathan was kissing her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The small crowd applauded. Elsie squealed with delight. Wyatt looked away, his face red, but there was a small smile on his lips. They were halfway back down the aisle when the church door slammed open. Gerald Thornton stood in the doorway, breathing hard like he'd been running. Behind him was a man Evelyn had never seen before, tall, official-looking, carrying a leather satchel. "Stop," Gerald said. "Stop the ceremony." The church went silent. Nathan's hand tightened on Evelyn's. "What the hell are you doing, Thornton?" "Saving you from making a terrible mistake," Gerald gestured to the man beside him. "This is Samuel Webb, a lawyer from the county seat. He's been looking into Mrs. Mercer's background. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Nathan demanded. I'm talking about the fact that your bride isn't who she says she is. Gerald's voice was loud, carrying through the church. Show them. Webb opened his satchel and pulled out a sheaf of papers. According to records from Philadelphia, there's a woman named Evelyn Mercer who's wanted for theft. She worked at a boarding house and disappeared 3 months ago with $200 belonging to the owner. The church erupted in whispers. Evelyn couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. That's ridiculous, Nathan said, but there was a question in his voice now. A doubt. Is it? Gerald stepped closer. She shows up out of nowhere with no references, no past, no one to vouch for her. She immediately attaches herself to the first man who'll take her in. And now she's marrying him barely 3 months later? Does that sound like innocent behavior to you? I didn't steal anything, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. Then why did you leave Philadelphia so suddenly? Webb asked. Why answer a mail-order bride advertisement and travel across the country if you weren't running from something? I was running from a life that was killing me. She looked at Nathan, pleading with him to understand. I worked at that boarding house for 2 years. When I left, I took only what I'd earned in wages, money the owner owed me and refused to pay. It wasn't theft. It was taking what was mine. That's not what the complaint says, Webb replied. It says you stole cash from the owner's lockbox and fled in the night. She's lying. Mrs. Hartford was always lying about the wages, claiming I hadn't worked hours I'd worked, shorting my pay. Evelyn stopped, hearing how it sounded. How desperate and convenient. You have proof of these wages? Webb asked. No, she didn't give receipts. It was all done in cash. How convenient. Nathan was staring at her, his face pale. Evelyn, I'm telling the truth, she said. Nathan, please, you have to believe me. Did you take money from that boarding house? I took what she owed me. That's not what I asked. His voice was hard now. Did you take money that she claimed wasn't yours? Evelyn felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Yes, but that's theft, Gerald said quietly. That's exactly what we're saying. The whispers in the church grew louder. Evelyn could see the faces around her, the judgment, the vindication in the eyes of people who'd never wanted to accept her anyway. I didn't steal, she said again, but her voice was lost in the noise. Webb stepped forward. Mrs. Mercer, or whatever your real name is, I'm authorized to take you back to Philadelphia to face charges. You can come willingly, or I can involve the local sheriff. Wait, Nathan said. Just wait. We need to figure this out. There has to be an explanation. The explanation is that she's a thief who ran away and tried to trap you into marriage, Gerald said. I'm sorry, Nathan. I know this is hard, but better you find out now than after. Shut up, Nathan snapped. He turned to Evelyn. Tell me the truth, all of it, right now. Right. Evelyn looked at his face, saw the doubt there, saw the way he was already pulling away from her. She could see it happening, everything they'd built crumbling because she'd been too ashamed to tell him about her past. I worked at that boarding house for 2 years, she said, her voice breaking. Mrs. Hartford was cruel. She'd dock our pay for any small mistake, claim we broke things we didn't break, charge us for meals and lodging that were supposed to be included. By the time I left, she owed me nearly $300 in back wages. I asked for it, begged for it. She laughed in my face. So you stole it, someone said from the crowd. I took what I'd earned, Evelyn's voice rose. I waited until she was out, opened the lockbox with a key I'd seen her use 100 times, and took $200. Not $300, not what she actually owed me. Just $200 because I knew if I took it all, she'd know it was me. And then I left because I couldn't spend one more day in that place. That's still theft, Webb said. It's justice. The law doesn't see it that way. Nathan was silent, staring at her. Evelyn reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Why didn't you tell me? He asked quietly. Because I was ashamed. Because I knew how it would sound. Because... Her voice broke. Because I thought if you knew, you wouldn't want me. So you lied. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Evelyn. Is it? She was crying now, not caring who saw. Is it the same as standing up in front of everyone and humiliating someone because you're too weak to stand up for what you want? Is it the same as abandoning your children to grief because you can't face your own pain Is it the same as, "Don't," Nathan said, his voice dangerous. "Don't turn this around on me." I'm not. I'm just saying we've all done things we're not proud of. We've all made choices that look bad from the outside. But I hoped, that what we built together was strong enough to survive the truth. The truth? Nathan laughed bitterly. I don't even know what that is anymore. I don't know who you really are. I'm the woman who fixed your house, who took care of your children, who fell in love with you even though I knew better. That's who I am. The rest is it's just the past. The past that's currently standing in our church with a lawyer threatening to arrest you. Evelyn looked at Webb, at Gerald's triumphant face, at the crowd of townspeople drinking in every moment of her humiliation. Then she looked at Nathan's children. Elsie was crying, her face buried in Wyatt's shoulder. Wyatt looked furious and betrayed and young, so terribly young. She'd done this to them, brought chaos and scandal into their lives when they'd already suffered enough. I'll go, she said quietly. What? Nathan stared at her. I'll go with Mr. Webb. Back to Philadelphia. Face whatever charges Mrs. Hartford filed. I won't fight it. Evelyn, it's better this way. Better for you. Better for the children. She pulled the wedding ring off her finger and held it out to him. I'm sorry. For all of it. I truly am. Nathan didn't take the ring. Don't do this. What choice do I have? You could stay. You could fight. I could drag you and your children through a scandal that will follow them for the rest of their lives. Evelyn shook her head. I won't do that. You've all been through enough. She turned to Webb. I'll need an hour to pack my things. That's acceptable. The walk back to the cabin was the longest of Evelyn's life. Nathan walked beside her in silence, the children trailing behind. No one spoke. What was there to say? At the cabin, Evelyn went to her room and began packing. It didn't take long. She still didn't own much. The dresses Nathan had bought her, the shoes Elsie had helped pick out, the hairbrush Wyatt had grudgingly given her for Christmas. She left it all except what she'd arrived with. The worn carpet bag, the old dresses, the photograph of her parents. She was closing the bag when Nathan appeared in the doorway. You're really leaving. I have to. No, you don't. We could hire a lawyer, fight this, prove that Mrs. Hartford owed you. With what money, Nathan? You can barely afford to feed your family. You can't afford a lawyer. Then we'll figure something else out. There's nothing to figure out. Evelyn's composure finally cracked. I took money that wasn't legally mine, even if it was morally justified. That makes me a thief in the eyes of the law, and staying here, dragging you into this mess, watching your children suffer because of my mistakes, I won't do it. What about what I want? What you want doesn't matter right now. What matters is protecting your family. You are my family, Nathan said, his voice breaking. Evelyn crossed to him, touching his face gently. No, I was going to be, but that was before... She stopped. I love you. I love those children, which is why I have to go. She kissed him once, soft and brief, tasting salt from both their tears. Then she picked up her bag and walked out of the room. Elsie was in the main room, still crying. Please don't go, Mama. Please. The word broke Evelyn's heart. I have to, sweetheart. But you promised. You said you wouldn't leave. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Wyatt stood by the door, his face hard and closed off. I told you, he said to his father. I told you she'd leave. They always leave. Wyatt, Nathan started. Don't. The boy's voice was ice. Just don't! Webb was waiting outside with a horse and wagon. He helped Evelyn into the seat without ceremony. The whole town seemed to be watching from various windows and doorways, witnessing her second public humiliation in Pine Ridge. But this one was worse, so much worse, because this time she was losing something real. As the wagon pulled away, Evelyn looked back one last time. Nathan stood on the porch, Elsie clinging to his leg, Wyatt's arms crossed in angry defense. The cabin she'd brought back to life. The family she'd almost had. Then they rounded the bend and it all disappeared from view. Evelyn sat in silence as the wagon headed toward the train station, toward Philadelphia, toward a future that looked like nothing but punishment for daring to want more than survival. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough. Instead, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her face composed. Let them think she was unaffected. Let them think she didn't care. It was easier than admitting the truth, that for 3 brief months she'd had everything she ever wanted, and she'd lost it all because she'd been too afraid to trust anyone with the full truth of who she was. The train station appeared ahead, small and lonely in the winter landscape. Evelyn closed her eyes and prepared herself for whatever came next. She'd survived worse. She'd survived this too, even if it killed her. But the wagon never made it to the train station. They were maybe 2 miles out when Nathan came thundering up on horseback, his face red from the cold and exertion, his eyes wild. "Stop the wagon," he shouted. Webb pulled the horses to a halt. "Mr. Hale, this isn't—" "I said stop!" Nathan dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, nearly falling in his haste. He strode to the wagon and looked up at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Get down," he said. "Nathan, I can't—" "Get down from the wagon, Evelyn." Webb started to protest, but Nathan cut him off. "I need 5 minutes with her, that's all." "Mr. Hale, she's in my custody." "5 minutes. Then if she still wants to go, I won't stop her." Webb looked between them, then sighed. 5 minutes. But I'm staying right here. Nathan helped Evelyn down, his hands rough and urgent on her waist. He pulled her away from the wagon, far enough that Webb couldn't hear them clearly. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked. "What I should have done in the church. What I should have done the second Gerald showed up with his accusations." Nathan grabbed both her hands. "I'm fighting for you." "There's nothing to fight for. The law? I don't care about the law. I care about you." His voice was fierce. "I stood there in that church and let doubt creep in. I let them make me question everything we built together. And the second that wagon pulled away, I realized what a damn fool I was being." "You weren't a fool. You were protecting your children by throwing away the best thing that's happened to this family in 3 years. That's not protection. That's cowardice." He squeezed her hands tighter. "You took money from a woman who stole from you first. You survived the only way you knew how. And yeah, maybe it wasn't legal, but I don't care. I don't care about any of it except that you're the woman who brought my family back to life." "Nathan, I love you. I love you, and I'm not letting you go without a fight." He pulled something from his coat pocket. "The marriage certificate, unsigned. We're finishing what we started." Evelyn stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything. But the scandal, the town, your business—" "Let them talk. Let them judge. I spent 3 years trying to make everyone else happy, trying to be the man they thought I should be, trying to hold everything together alone. And I was miserable. Then you showed up and suddenly everything made sense again. I'm not throwing that away because some gossiping busybodies think they know better." "What about the children?" "The children need you. Elsie hasn't stopped crying since you left. And Wyatt—" Nathan's voice caught. "Wyatt punched Gerald Thornton in the face right there in the church." Despite everything, Evelyn almost laughed. "He did what?" "Broke his nose, split his own knuckles open doing it. Then he looked at me and said, 'She's family. You don't let people hurt family.'" Nathan's eyes were wet. "My 10-year-old son understands what I should have known all along. You're not leaving, not unless you truly don't want this anymore." "Of course I want this. Then stay. Face whatever comes. But face it with me beside you." "I could go to jail, Nathan. For months, maybe years. What kind of life is that for you?" "A life where I know you're coming back. A life where we fight together instead of running away." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "I already lost one wife. I'm not losing another. Not without doing everything in my power to keep you." Evelyn looked at this man who'd offered her shelter when no one else would, who'd seen her value when the whole town called her worthless, who was standing here now, willing to risk everything because he'd finally learned what she'd known all along. Love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about choosing someone broken and damaged and flawed, and deciding they were worth fighting for anyway. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. But I'm more scared of living without you." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, not caring that Webb was watching or that they were standing on a frozen road in the middle of nowhere. When they broke apart, Nathan pulled out the marriage certificate. "Webb," he called, "you're authorized to witness legal documents, right?" The lawyer looked confused. "Yes, but—" "Then witness this." Nathan pulled out a pencil, signed his name on the certificate with quick, decisive strokes, then handed it to Evelyn. Your turn. Nathan, this is insane. Tuts, sign it, please. Evelyn looked at the certificate, at Nathan's signature dark and bold next to where hers should go. She thought about Philadelphia, about Mrs. Hartford's cruelty, about all the years she'd spent invisible and unwanted. Then she thought about Elsie's smile, Wyatt's grudging acceptance, the cabin that finally felt like home. She signed her name. Nathan grabbed Webb. You saw that, right? You're a witness. We're legally married now. That's not exactly how... Is it legal or not? Webb sighed. Technically, yes. If the ceremony was completed before she left and you both signed the certificate, then you're married in the eyes of the law. Good. Nathan turned to Evelyn. You're my wife now, which means whatever trouble you're in, we face it together. That's not how marriage works. It's exactly how marriage works. They rode back to Pine Ridge together, Nathan on his horse, Evelyn in the wagon with an increasingly annoyed Webb. When they reached the cabin, the children were still on the porch, where they'd been left. Elsie saw them first. Mama! She flew down the steps and crashed into Evelyn's arms the second she stepped down from the wagon. Evelyn caught her, holding tight, breathing in the little girl's scent. You came back, Elsie sobbed. You came back. Your father wouldn't let me leave. Good. He's not a complete idiot then. The voice came from Wyatt, still standing on the porch. His knuckles were wrapped in cloth, blood seeping through. He looked angry and scared and relieved all at once. I heard you punched Gerald Thornton, Evelyn said. He deserved it. You're probably right, but you shouldn't have... Yeah, well, somebody needed to, Wyatt's voice cracked. Somebody needed to stand up for you since you wouldn't do it yourself. Evelyn set Elsie down and climbed the porch steps. She stopped in front of Wyatt, this angry boy who tested her every day since she arrived. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me. Just don't leave again. I won't. Promise? I promise. Wyatt nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the cabin before she could see him cry. That night, after Webb had been sent to the boarding house with a promise they'd deal with the legal situation in the morning, the four of them sat around the dinner table. Evelyn had made stew, the same simple recipe she'd made her first night there. It felt fitting somehow. So what happens now? Wyatt asked, pushing food around his plate. We figure it out, Nathan said. How? She's still wanted for theft. That lawyer's still here. The whole town thinks... The whole town can think whatever they want. Nathan's voice was firm. We're a family now, legally, officially, and families stick together. Even if she goes to jail? The blunt question hung in the air. Even then, Nathan said, looking at Evelyn. Even then. But in the morning, something unexpected happened. Margaret showed up at the cabin just after dawn before Nathan left for work. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept. I need to talk to you, she said to Evelyn. Alone. Nathan started to protest, but Evelyn touched his arm. It's fine. They walked out to the woodshed, the same place Evelyn had talked to Wyatt weeks ago. Margaret looked around at the neatly stacked wood, the organized tools, the evidence of a household that functioned. I owe you an apology, Margaret said abruptly. Several, actually. You already apologized once. That was before I tried to ruin your life again. Margaret's face was hard with self-loathing. I told Gerald about the lawyer. I'm the one who suggested he look into your past. Evelyn went very still. Why? Because I was jealous. Because watching you find happiness when I've been miserable for years made me bitter. Because... Margaret's voice broke. Because it's easier to tear other people down than fix your own life. That's honest, at least. I'm not here for absolution. I'm here to fix what I broke. Margaret pulled papers from her coat. I sent a telegram to Philadelphia, to the boarding house. I told Mrs. Hartford that if she pursued charges against you, I'd make sure everyone knew how she treated her workers, how she stole wages, how she ran that place like a prison. And she doesn't want that attention. Bad for business. Margaret handed over the papers. She's dropping the charges. Webb will get confirmation by telegraph this morning, but this is my copy. You're free. Evelyn stared at the papers, not quite believing what she was reading. Why would you do this? Because you were right. What I said in the store, what I did, it was cruel. And watching you stand up to Gerald yesterday, Watching you choose to leave rather than drag Nathan and his children through scandal. Margaret looked away. It made me realize how small I've become. How mean. I don't like who I am anymore. So change. It's not that simple, isn't it? Evelyn handed the papers back. You just proved you can do better. You saved me from jail. That's not the action of a small person. I'm the one who put you in danger in the first place. And now you've fixed it. That counts for something. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I'm leaving Pine Ridge. Gerald offered to buy out my share of the store. I'm going to take the money and go somewhere new. Somewhere I can start over without everyone knowing my business. That's brave. Or cowardly. Hard to tell sometimes. Margaret looked at her directly. For what it's worth, I think Nathan's lucky to have you. And I think you're lucky to have him. Don't waste it. I don't plan to. After Margaret left, Evelyn went back inside. Nathan was feeding Elsie breakfast. Wyatt was getting ready for school. Normal, mundane family chaos. She handed Nathan the papers. He read them twice, then looked at her with something like wonder. You're free. I'm free. Which means we can... He stopped, a smile spreading across his face. We can actually do this. Build a real life. Without looking over our shoulders. Apparently so. Nathan swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing like she'd never heard him laugh before. Elsie squealed with delight. Even Wyatt cracked a smile. When he set her down, Nathan cupped her face in his hands. Marry me again. We're already married. I know. But we never got to finish the ceremony properly. No interruptions, no accusations, just us and the people who actually matter. So they did. The following Sunday, they stood in the same church with the same minister, but this time there were no lawyers, no dramatic interruptions, just a small gathering of people who'd chosen to show up despite the gossip. Mrs. Morrison was there, sitting in the front row with a genuine smile. Mrs. Chen brought flowers. The blacksmith and his wife came with their children. A few of Nathan's clients showed up. It wasn't a big crowd, but it was honest. Gerald Thornton was notably absent. Word was he'd left town the day after Wyatt broke his nose, embarrassed and defeated. The ceremony was brief and simple. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Life never was. Nathan's business struggled through a slow period. Wyatt got into another fight at school. Elsie had nightmares. The cabin needed constant repairs. Money was tight. The town still gossiped. But they faced it all together. Evelyn learned that family wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up every day, even when it was hard. It was about forgiving mistakes and accepting flaws, and choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. One evening in late spring, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed and children tucked into bed, Nathan and Evelyn sat on the porch watching the sun set through the pine trees. Do you ever regret it? Nathan asked. Answering that advertisement, coming to Pine Ridge? Evelyn thought about the humiliation of that first day, the months of hard work, the fear and uncertainty and pain, about almost losing everything because she'd been too afraid to trust anyone with the truth. No, she said finally, even the hard parts led me here, led me to you. To us, Nathan corrected, taking her hand. To us. Inside the cabin, they could hear Elsie singing softly to her doll. Wyatt was reading by lamplight, his homework spread across the table. The fire burned steady in the hearth. Everything was warm and alive and full. This was what happiness looked like, Evelyn realized. Not some grand romantic gesture, not perfection or security or certainty about the future. Just this. Ordinary moments strung together into a life worth living. She'd spent 48 years believing she wasn't worth wanting. Believing her value came only from how useful she could be. Believing that love and belonging were luxuries meant for other people. But Nathan had taught her different. He'd shown her that being wanted wasn't about being perfect or young or beautiful. It was about being seen. Really seen. By someone who chose to love all the broken, difficult, complicated parts. And his children had taught her that family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was showing up. It was loving people even when they made it hard. What are you thinking about? Nathan asked. How far I've come. How different my life looks now. Better different? Immeasurably better. He pulled her close, and she leaned into his warmth, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in Pine Ridge, people were probably still talking about them, about the scandal, about the older woman who'd trapped the young widower, about how it would never last. Let them talk. Evelyn had learned that other people's opinions mattered far less than she'd once believed. What mattered was this: the man beside her who'd fought for her when she'd given up on herself, the children inside who'd chosen to let her into their broken hearts, the life they were building together, imperfect and messy and real. She'd come to Pine Ridge expecting rejection and got a family instead. She'd arrived believing her life was nearly over and discovered it was just beginning. She'd been the woman nobody wanted and became the woman who finally understood her own worth. Not because someone else gave it to her, but because she'd finally learned to claim it for herself. The moon rose over the pine trees, casting silver light across the cabin yard. Inside, Wyatt called out that he was going to bed. Elsie's singing had stopped, replaced by the soft breathing of sleep, the ordinary sounds of a family settling in for the night. Nathan stood, offering his hand. Ready to go in? Evelyn took it, letting him pull her to her feet. Ready. They walked inside together, closing the door on the cold night. The fire had burned down to embers, but Nathan built it back up while Evelyn checked on the children. Wyatt was already asleep, his homework abandoned on the table. Elsie was curled around her doll, peaceful and safe. In their bedroom, the one Nathan had built with his own hands, Evelyn prepared for bed while her husband moved around their home, banking fires and checking locks. These quiet rituals of domesticity that she'd once thought would never be hers. When Nathan joined her, sliding under the blankets and pulling her close, Evelyn felt something she'd spent a lifetime searching for finally settle into place. Peace, not the absence of problems, not some fairy tale ending where everything was suddenly perfect, just the deep, abiding peace that came from being exactly where you belonged. I love you, Nathan murmured into her hair. I love you too. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. Another winter was coming. There would be hard times ahead, lean months, difficult days, moments when they'd struggle and fight and wonder if they'd made the right choice, but they'd face it all together, because that was what family did. And Evelyn Hale, no longer Mercer, no longer unwanted, no longer alone, had finally found hers. Years later, when people asked how she ended up in Pine Ridge, she'd tell them the truth, that she answered an advertisement from a man who rejected her, that she ended up working for a struggling carpenter with 2 grieving children, that she almost lost everything because of mistakes from her past. But she'd also tell them this: sometimes the worst moments of your life lead you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes rejection is redirection. Sometimes the thing that feels like the end is actually the beginning. She'd arrived in Pine Ridge at 48 years old, believing she was too old for new beginnings, too worn down for happiness, too damaged for love. She'd been wrong about all of it, because it's never too late to start over, never too late to find your people, never too late to discover that you are always worthy of love. You'd just been looking for it in the wrong places. The cabin at the edge of town, once cold and empty and dying, was now filled with warmth and laughter and life. The children who'd been frozen in grief learned to hope again. The man who'd been drowning in loneliness found partnership and love, and the woman who'd believed she was unwanted discovered her own strength. Not because someone rescued her, but because she finally rescued herself. And in doing so, she saved them all.